I would love for adults to stop seeing kids who are acting out as bad kids or being difficult or somehow a problem, and instead look at it as an opportunity to strengthen that child's skills, whatever this skill at hand may be. And really, it's good when kids misbehave because then it shows us how to help them. It's this red flag or signal to us that, oh, attention is needed here.
Welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. I'm your host, Debbie Reber, and today is an episode about bad behavior, specifically the good news about bad behavior. That's the name of a new book by journalist, author, speaker, and parent educator Katherine Reynolds Lewis. In this episode, Katherine and I talk about what our kids' behavior is telling us and how we as parents and teachers and other adults in kids' lives can best respond to it while encouraging our kids to develop into healthy adults. In researching and writing her book, Katherine connected with one of our favorite parenting thought leaders, Dr. Ross Greene, and reframed her own thinking about bad behavior as being a child's way of demonstrating lagging skills. Her book aims to help parents navigate the tricky behavioral situations we face and to work with their children toward better solutions. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope it offers you some good food for thought. Here is my conversation with Katherine. Hey, Katherine, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, I'm so happy that I discovered you and your awesome new book via the interwebs, and just so happy that we're able to bring you on the show because I think your book and the message you're sharing through it is really going to be an interesting one for our audience. So before we get into that, I always start these conversations by asking people to just tell me a little bit about yourself, your background and who you are as a writer and a parent.
Absolutely. So I'm a journalist. I started off in business journalism, 20 years ago, and really was very much focused on that until I had children. And then suddenly all these questions of parenting and education and instilling character and executive function started to be much more interesting to me. And around, 2008, when the recession really hit and newspapers were having trouble, I lost my job along with the other 24 people in my bureau here in Washington, D.C. area. So then I went freelance and really was able to write about whatever I wanted that I could get someone to pay me for. So then I started delving much more into education and parenting and trying to understand psychology and what was going on in my kids' brains. And through that, I just sort of shifted my writing practice more and more to be writing about parenting subjects and child development. And then in 2015, I wrote an article for Mother Jones Magazine about school discipline that went viral. And that was really such a wonderful launching pad to write much more about child development and delve into the neuroscience of how our brains get wired the way they are. And eventually writing this book, The Good News About Bad Behavior, which came out in April 2018.
I love hearing stories like that because I think it's just so cool when work life and parenting life joins together. So what a great thing to be able to focus your professional energy and time doing all this research, which you can then totally use in your own life.
Right. It's the definition of news you can use when I'm writing about discipline and at 3:30 my kids tumble in the door and do something I don't like, that I get to test my new knowledge.
Yes, that is a hazard of this business. We know I'm in the same situation with, getting to speak with so many parenting experts. And then I get many opportunities to see where I'm screwing up and to practice the things that I'm learning. So I want to talk about your book. So that's going to be the focus of our conversation. Can you tell us, you gave us kind of an overview of how you got into this, but specifically talking about behavior. Tell us a little bit more about the impetus behind the good news about bad behavior. And then beyond that, what you are hoping like it does in the world, if you have a big goal for how you hope it changes conversations or impacts parents.
Oh, what a wonderful question. And I guess it is a long story because I started puzzling over this question of why won't my kids do what I want, really when my youngest was 3 and she's now 11. So, in one way or another, I've been kind of pulling at that thread for 8 years and really got interested in it because my kids are just so different from I am, the way I am. They are rambunctious, high energy, creative. And I was the typical good girl who did what I was told, and I loved to sit and read for hours. And they love to read also, but they also have so many other interests and ideas about how they should behave in a family. And so I started trying to understand how we could all work together. And over the course of those 8 years, I really came to understand their behavior not as bad behavior or trying to be difficult, but as needing skills to manage the transition or to handle their impulses or simply to learn to be civilized and sit at the table during dinner. Over the course of those 8 years, I was also volunteering in their school. I was a Girl Scout leader. I coached Odyssey of the Mind, which is a creative problem solving team. And in all these settings, I saw other kids who just seemed so different from the kids that I grew up with in how they responded to discipline, in how they interacted with adults and each other. And so that got me curious about whether it was a broader issue and change in how kids are developing today that maybe would be something important for everyone to know about. And then as a journalist, I started speaking to experts. I started interviewing psychologists, and I met a man named Ross Greene, who's a psychologist in New England. And at the time I spoke with him, writing a typical parenting feature story, he was about to move his family from Boston to Maine. He was uprooting his teen kids and his wife and leaving his practice at Harvard Medical School and Massachusetts General Hospital. And that impressed me. So I started learning more about his model of discipline, which started with children in locked psychiatric wards who really had intense challenges that made them a threat to themselves or others. And his model, which is very collaborative and cooperative, was remarkably successful. So he managed to reduce holds in those settings from 20 a month to 0. So from kids needing to be restrained physically or medically, so often suddenly they were just cooperating with the adults. And he moved his model into juvenile justice settings and had very similar success. And then in schools where principals were telling me that their discipline problems had been reduced 70, 80%, that teachers were able to do more instruction, the kids were getting along better. And that's what led to the Mother Jones story and really this whole book. And in terms of what I hope the book will do in the world, I looked at his model and 3 other discipline models that are based on research and science for what kids need and how kids' brains develop. And from those, I pulled the 3 common threads that I think they all share, which are a very strong adult-child connection, communication about what's going on, the problem at hand, and then a focus on capability building so that children are seen as needing skills, as I said earlier, and not bad. That kids need to build their ability, their social emotional skills, and their ability to manage their own behavior, thoughts, and emotion. And so all of these models share that, and there's so many examples in the book of how to implement those 3 steps: connection, communication, and capability building. And as for what I hope it'll do in the world, I would love for adults to stop seeing kids who are acting out as bad kids or being difficult or somehow a problem, and instead look at it as an opportunity to strengthen that child's skills, whatever this skill at hand may be. And really, it's good when kids misbehave because then it shows us how to help them. It's this red flag or signal to us that, oh, attention is needed here. And this is how kids develop. They go through stages when they are struggling with some new challenge and they need support often to to figure it out. And that's our role. It's not that we're going to always have perfectly behaved children. It's to always be constantly supporting them and helping them tackle these challenges. One of the most startling findings in my book was the figure that 1 in 2 children, by the time they're 18, will have some kind of mood or behavioral disorder or a substance addiction. And to me, that was just stunning that every other kid in my child's preschool class, by the time they graduate from high school, will have something pretty serious that they are managing. And I hope that it's actually a hopeful and optimistic statistic, because it sort of normalizes when your child is going through something, whether it's ADHD or anxiety or some kind of brain difference, that you're dealing with one challenge, your neighbor's probably dealing with something else, and we all are in it together.
So much of what you just shared just totally resonates with me, and I'm sure with listeners. So I want to go back. First of all, I love that Dr. Greene's work was such a part of your book. I know we had emailed back and forth a little bit about this, but he is certainly, I've had him on the podcast. He is someone most of our listeners are very familiar with. His book, The Explosive Child, for me, was just changed our family's life, and the whole model of reframing, lagging skills. And, it's just such a shift that once you make it, it's kind of like getting new glasses, everything changes in your life. So I love that that was underlying your book. And then you talked about stop seeing kids as acting out and looking at things that are happening as opportunities, and maybe talk a little bit more about that. That's something that I've worked just personally a lot on, is trying to look at any time, in the past when we've had some big intense reactions or just things just totally caught me off guard. And suddenly we're in this situation where things are not going well, to try to think, okay, what is the learning moment here? Like, how can I flip this on its head and turn it into an opportunity? So can you talk a little bit more about that, how parents can make that shift in their mindset in terms of how to approach bad behavior?
Absolutely. I also want to start by saying, obviously, this is very hard for parents too. Like, it's not so easy to go through a day with a child who's highly emotional or has difficulty with transition or who isn't cooperating in the way that you need. And I just want to acknowledge that, these are really big challenges. And one of my goals with the book is to offer some kind of community and support to parents who feel like this is much harder than I thought, and it is. It's harder now than it was in the past. The tools from the past don't work anymore. So I'm hoping that this new framework, these new eyeglasses, as you say, will help people to, have a little more courage to deal with the challenges. And I guess the way that I see it is that our children just aren't learning the normal developmental stages that they need the way that they used to. So kids used to learn social emotional skills through play, through managing their own time, through all the things that have sort of disappeared from our modern society. And it's entirely possible that there's something else going on, some other environmental factor that's contributing to the rise in anxiety and depression, ADHD, behavioral issues, and developmental challenges that kids are facing. But we're sort of here in the trenches and we have to get through our day. So the more that we look at a kid acting up as showing us that there's something needed, it just puts us in the mindset of problem solving and being capable, instead of feeling like, oh no, now my day is ruined and the plans that I had for, getting through these activities or managing our household routine are disrupted. So for me, it's been very helpful just to try to attack those kinds of situations with enthusiasm instead of despair. And I think that's often what we go to when our kid is acting up, is we think, oh, I did something wrong, or I didn't prepare for this moment, or I should have known this was going to happen. And so we have that sense of failure that we've somehow caused it, or that we're to blame for not preventing it. And those are just not helpful emotions. They're not going to make us stronger in the moment at dealing with our child. It's not going to give us that resilience or sense of confidence that we need to lead our children through a difficult moment. And that's one of the things that I've found, at least, that is much more helpful. So
I think that too, this sense of failure and shooting on ourselves, as I say, like it is a pretty new, it's a generational thing. I know that my parents certainly, I was a kid growing up in the 70s and the 80s. They were not sitting around discussing how they could do this, and this, or protect me, emotionally from this. Or it was kind of like, no, I'm your parent. You have to learn these things. It was more hands off. And I think there is something to be said for the way that we feel we need to be everything for our child now. And there is a strong urge to protect them from failing too. And really, it's so much more helpful if we can model failure in a great way. Like we're all learning here.
Right. Absolutely. And, for parents who have very young children, you're sort of in the perfect position to be more hands-off in those early years and let kids experience some bumps and bruises and make choices they regret, because then they'll be much better positioned to handle difficulty in, early childhood and teen years. And, one of the challenges I think parents do face now is, because that's no longer our model, we do have to be more hands-on at times in supporting our kids. And it's hard. There's a little bit of tension there. We want to let our kids fail, but we also have to be that coach or mentor, helping them process the failure sometimes and plan for what they might do differently. So it's a middle ground of where we no longer can just be at the hands-off parents. Like when I was growing up, I walked myself home from school in upper elementary. I made myself a snack. I managed my homework. I really was making so many decisions. And because I was doing that from very young, I was able to. And our kids now, if they haven't had that experience, they may need to build up to it a bit. And we can be that sort of sounding board and safe place to help them process their mistakes and plan for the future. And especially for kids who have any kind of, neurodiverse challenge that they're managing, it can take a lot longer for that learning to happen than we maybe think it should. So we have to be braced with all of our patience and all of our zen, to just say, okay, I guess it's going to take another time to learn not to leave the notebook at school, or that if you start a fight, you're going to get in trouble, or, all these things that our kids get into.
We'll be right back after this quick break. Maybe I've watched too many seasons of The Amazing Race, but every time I have to go somewhere on the subway, I treat it like a competition. It's all about making the right gut decisions about which route will get me there the fastest. Sometimes those decisions get me where I'm going early, and other times my gambles don't really pay off. Probiotics can't help with most gut decisions, but if your gut needs a little support, Ritual has your back. Their Symbiotic Plus, a 3-in-1 supplement, has clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support a balanced gut microbiome. I've been using Symbiotic Plus for about 6 months now, and it's become a core part of my morning routine. I take the mini capsule every morning while making my way through my inbox, whether I'm at home or I'm on the road, because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. And the capsule itself is delayed released, which helps it survive the harsh conditions of the upper GI tract for delivery to the colon. And that's exactly where we want it to go. Ritual invested in a study modeling the human colon, which showed that Symbiotic Plus significantly increased microbial diversity and the growth of beneficial bacteria. There's no more shame in your gut game. Symbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. Get 25% off your first month for a limited time at ritual.com/tilt. Start Ritual or add Symbiotic Plus to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/tilt for 25% off. During this month of planning and organization for big transitions, rhythms and routines have been absolutely essential for our physical and emotional well-being. So Green Chef nights are reliably and predictably a good night. We know the ingredients will be fresh and prepped, the instructions easy to follow, and the meal delicious. We're all still talking about last week's turkey tacos with mango chimichurri sauce, refried beans, and Monterey Jack cheese. Green Chef contributes to a healthy lifestyle with easy and delicious menus like fresh seasonal salads and grain bowls, and with over 80 weekly meal and market options, plus rotating options to suit a variety of lifestyles, whether Mediterranean, plant-based, calorie-smart, keto, protein-packed, gluten-free. There are always plenty of options to choose from. Whatever you select, you'll get farm fresh ingredients, organic whole fruits and veggies, and premium proteins, all delivered straight to your door. I love those 4 words, straight to my door. Oh, and one more thing I love about Green Chef, they have an app, which means it's easy to manage meal preferences and delivery from your phone if you want to. And I, for one, want to. I am in that mode where I'm making the most of little moments like waiting in line at the pharmacy or for the F train to pull into the station to tackle all of those to-dos. So the convenience of an app is key for me. Green Chef has a special offer for Tilt listeners. Go to greenchef.com/tilt50 and use code TILT50 to get 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months. That's 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months when you use the code TILT50 at greenchef.com/tilt50. So what about this idea of letting go of control? So you talked about the pressure that we put on ourselves to do all these things right for how we feel as parents. But there's also that piece, especially when it comes to our kids' behavior, which is often external and in public situations or in environments where it's going to be noticed by other people. So can you talk a little bit about that piece of letting go of what other people are thinking of our parenting and our discipline?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's so hard. I think the silent judgment of other parents has been responsible for more bad parenting choices than possibly anything because it's so, visceral. You can sort of feel when your kid's acting up or even my daughter in 3rd grade refused to brush her hair. So every day she went to school with a tangle full of hair pulled back in a ponytail. And it just was so hard for me to let go and say, this is not a fight I'm getting into with my child. My relationship is more important. It's her body. But once we start practicing letting go of those feelings that other people are judging us, the easier it gets. And when we take into the big perspective, keep that at the forefront of our mind, we're not worried about that one day in 3rd grade or the, moment in the grocery store at age 4. We're really supposed to be focused on age 25 or 35 when our kids are capable and independent, and they will never get to be independent if we don't start letting them practice now. So for them to learn self-control, we have to start giving up control. And it's a process throughout our child's life and development that we begin with them as tiny babies and we're in charge of everything. And from that moment, we need to think of our goal as constantly expanding the circle of things they're responsible for and shrinking our part of that role until we completely work ourselves out of the job of being the parent, because they can take over everything and launch successfully into the world and, again, make choices that maybe we might disagree with, but they can learn from them and take ownership of those choices.
Yeah, and doing that appropriately in terms of respecting the timeline that they're on, which may be different from their same age peers. But I love that, that's something we talk a lot about, is keeping your eye on the end goal, taking a step back, looking at the big picture and what we ultimately want for our kids to be fulfilled, autonomous individuals, who can live the life that they want to lead.
I always say to my kids, your job is to figure out who you are and how you are going to be in the world, what fills you with passion and what you're going to contribute. And my job is to support you because I can't make those decisions. I'm not going to know or be able to tell what they should do that's going to be their passion. And one of the other people that I followed in my book, Vicky Hofel, who wrote a book called Duct Tape Parenting, she said, in one of the scenes in my book, that if your child is suddenly diagnosed with a fatal illness, you're not going to care about that missed homework or the broken coffee pot or whatever the thing in front of you that's amping you up right now is. So that's another way to keep it in perspective. Is this really life or death, or is this something that's a learning opportunity?
Yeah, and that reminds me, and I had been thinking about this and looking at your book too, the work of Alfie Kohn, who wrote Unconditional Parenting. And for me, that book, I don't know, Asher, who's now 13, was probably 5 or 6 when I looked at that for the first time. But the way he talked about just really questioning all these things that we're correcting our children about and wondering why. Why is this something that needs to be corrected? Why is this something you are asking your child to do? Where do those ideas stem from? And I think that's just really interesting. I think we come into parenting with these ideas about what equals good behavior without sometimes even questioning where those come from. I'm wondering what you found in working on this book about the root of our expectations about what behavior should and shouldn't look like.
That's a great question. And yeah, it's so interesting with Alfie Kohn. I read that book when Maddie was like 3, and I just thought, this is insane, right? This is ridiculous. And I sort of put it aside, and I've completely come full circle to really appreciate all of his work and his ideas. And I think it's because I had to take that journey myself to start questioning. And now I say, we need to ration our no's, right? If you're going to tell your child no, that could provoke a power struggle. So make sure that you have a good reason for setting that limit or that boundary. And if you don't say no or correct your child all the time, then when you do, they will pay more attention because they realize it's more infrequent. Our kids get tuned out to our corrections if we're like the parents in Peanuts going, wah, 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 if we're always correcting them. And yeah, the root of the expectations is such a great question. I think that actually our society has changed dramatically and we don't even realize it. But 50 years ago, the boss was in charge of the factory, and then probably the dad was in charge of the mom, and the mom was in charge of the kids. And there was this chain of command, and authoritarian practices were just embedded throughout our society. And we've really come to be a much more open, respectful, and egalitarian world in, the developing world, and certainly in the US, where we've had a civil rights movement, we had a women's rights movement, we've had LGBTQ rights movement, we're having a neurodiversity movement. And so all of these different groups of people are saying we all deserve to be equal. So why wouldn't children also expect to be equal and to have a voice? And so all of those authoritarian ideas are still embedded in a lot of our adult brains, and it seems natural to go to, but it's not the world we live in anymore. And perhaps our children understand that better than we do, and they're demanding equality and a voice in our homes and in our schools that we just instinctively pull back from because of how things were when we were children.
Yeah. That's such a great answer. It's such an interesting thing to think about. I love that, thinking of this as its own movement, and it is, and it's a really cool concept.
Yeah, it's a children's rights movement.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to just talk about behavior in the context of differently wired kids, because for parents raising atypical kids, the behavior is kind of, again, that external thing. It's the thing that we're constantly having to problem solve around, to negotiate support for in schools. And it's what draws attention to our kids and creates a lot of the problems in the classroom for many of our kids. So do you have any thoughts on how we can best advocate for our children and compassionately educate, educators and other people about shifting the way that they're perceiving our kids' behavior?
Yes. Oh, such a good question. And this really is the challenge, because even educators who say, oh, I understand, we have this, education plan, and we have, we know that your child has ADHD or that they have some kind of processing issue. They may understand it intellectually and believe it, but then they also have these expectations underlying the surface that they may not be consciously aware of. So even though intellectually they may say, oh, I understand that this behavior is coming from some specific different wiring in that child's brain, they respond to it instinctively. So it's just almost the same process as the way that we are raising our children, is helping to kind of constantly educate the people who are in charge of our kids during the day. So of course that starts with connection, right? Having a strong relationship with your child's classroom teachers, the counselor, the principal, and whoever's in the school who can be an advocate, and sort of having a steady conversation where you can inject, oh yeah, I know it's so hard with, kids who have ADHD that they really seem to space out, or it takes them longer. Doesn't it take them longer to learn how to keep track of all those assignments, so that it can be a little bit of an undercurrent in that conversation all the time? And then when something comes up, it is not the first time you've had that conversation with that educator, and you're sort of reminding them, yeah, remember this kid has ADHD or has a processing issue. And we also have to be patient with them as well, because it's not easy. I mean, I've observed so many classrooms for this book, and it's a huge challenge to manage. Even typically developing kids in a class now really aren't so cooperative. So they have a lot on their plate. And as much as we can be sort of an ally and offering suggestions and understanding when they make mistakes and misjudge our kids and try to work together with them, that may not always feel fair that we have to do that, but it is often the only path that we have to try to take whatever allyship we can get in the school building and build on that. And one great thing that I've seen some parents do is start a book group with whoever in the building is sympathetic, that maybe read, my book, of course, The Good News About Bad Behavior, or read The Explosive Child or Lost at School, or another book where you're not coming in to educate them, but you're relying on an expert or a book to say, oh, these are some ideas that we should consider in how our kids are being handled in the school.
We'll be right back after this quick break. Hey there, it's Debbie. I love making this show and sharing conversations about how to support our awesome neurodivergent kids. I've seen how even one little insight from an interview can spark a big shift in daily life. But I know that raising complex kids can be messy and lonely. And just when we think we figured it out, something comes up that boots us right back to feeling overwhelmed and stuck. That's why I've poured everything into creating a way for parents like us navigating complex parenting journeys to join together and chart a path that feels positive, hopeful, and doable. It's the brand new Differently Wired Club experience. In the club, you'll get personal support from me and other seasoned parent coaches, 6 live calls every month where you can connect and get your personal questions answered, the opportunity to learn directly from authors and experts like I have on this show, monthly themes for getting specific and tactical, an exclusive private podcast feed, and the best, most generous community of parents. Seriously, these folks show up for themselves and each other, and that right there is really everything, because it's a daily reminder that we're not alone. Our kids aren't broken, and we have totally got this. The recently rebooted Differently Wired Club is on a brand new platform with its very own iOS and Android app. It is such a great space. However you learn, whatever your style, no matter the ages, genders, and neurodivergent profile of your children, the Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Join us today by going to tiltparenting.com/club. That's tiltparenting.com/club. I hope to see you on the inside.
If you're a parent, I invite you to join us at the Mindful Mama podcast, where it's all about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. With sometimes hilarious and always thought-provoking experts and friends, at Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have. And when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm Hunter Clark Fields, and I can't wait to see you there. Listen in to the Mindful Mama podcast.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, I think that we are in the best position, parents with atypical kids to, and I've been using this phrase a lot, compassionately educate, because I think we need to see other people in this relationship with our child through the eyes of compassion, because, as parents, we know what we're dealing with, but these other teachers and camp counselors and, other people who interact with our kids are doing the best they can too, and without the same kind of tools and resources that we necessarily have access to. So I really like that allyship, designing that alliance. All right. I just wanted to circle back to one question. You talked about 1 in 2, the statistic that 1 in 2, I think you said teenagers, or by the time they're adults, are experiencing a mood or behavior disorders. And Are there things that we can do as parents as we're raising our kids to help them avoid having mental and behavioral health problems down the road?
Oh, what a great question. Yeah. So this is the National Institutes of Mental Health study, and it was of all children. So kids up to age 18 was that statistic. I think that, using this model that's in my book of connection, communication, and capability building is our best defense, where we are steadily trying to build our children's social and emotional skills and their executive function. And I sometimes joke, it's like I have to be my kid's therapist and executive function coach, because you're just sort of painstakingly every opportunity you get trying to nudge them further along that path. And when we're doing that, we are helping our kids to avoid challenges in the future. And one of the models in my book, the PACS Good Behavior Game, which is used in classes, has been shown to reduce symptoms of ADHD and ODD, and to actually sometimes bring kids into the typical range who might have been on the borderline or have a diagnosis. So it can be very powerful. And the other really important finding in my book was how devastating criticism can be to children. So the research on parental criticism is really scary. And it goes back in the behavioral science. The observational research is decades old, that people who have some kind of mental illness or psychiatric condition are more susceptible to parental criticism, and that when they have recovered and they're in a steady state, they can relapse much more easily when they're exposed to a lot of parental criticism. So that's another really strong argument that compassion and encouragement is the tool that will help our kids. And the more we can try not to correct and criticize and point out all of their mistakes, the better position they'll be for mental health. And this holds for depression, eating disorders, schizophrenia, a bunch of other conditions, alcoholism and addiction, that the more that our loved ones are critical of us, the more we're sort of weakened and more likely to relapse into those kinds of conditions.
That is fascinating. And I was just talking about this idea of positive reinforcement with someone earlier today. There's a executive functioning coach named Seth Perler, who I've had on the show a couple of times, who is fantastic, by the way.
I listened to that podcast. I loved it.
Oh, good. He's so great. And one of the things he said the first time I interviewed him was that our kids need 5 positive comments for every 1 negative piece of feedback. And when he said that, I was like, oh my gosh, I am doing this wrong. And I had to sit down with my husband and say, hey, we really need to cut back on just the littlest things, don't forget to put your napkin here. Don't, just all those things. Those are all can be perceived as I'm screwing up. I'm doing it wrong. And so I've, since that conversation, made such an effort to notice, just notice all the growth that's happening. And I recognize how Asha responds to those things. And I love that that's such a piece of helping our kids, become healthier adults who feel good about themselves. So that's really fascinating.
Yeah, we're like the memory keepers for our kids. They may not notice how they're growing and changing. So the more we can point it out, the better. And our kids, kids who are atypical, they know. They know they're making mistakes. They already feel bad about themselves. Mm-hmm. They can see, compared to their peers, how they're different. So they don't need us pointing out those mistakes to them.
Exactly. Tell me something I don't already know. Yeah. So your book is called The Good News About Bad Behavior, and I would like you to tell us what the good news is about bad behavior.
The good news is that it is a totally normal way that kids develop nowadays, that these things that seem like bumps in the road or problems are just the path to success. And so we should, as I said in the beginning, view them as opportunities and not problems. And the other good news is that there's so many research-backed, road-tested methods of discipline that are compassionate and collaborative that will help our kids to develop the skills that they need. So there's so many amazing resources, and I tried to kind of pull all of them into my book and highlight the 4 that I thought were the most comprehensive. So there's so many different things to try, and if one doesn't work, probably another one will. And even when we as adults mess up and criticize our kids or yell at them or blame them, that itself is an opportunity for us to model apologizing and making amends for a mistake. So it's hard parenting any child, but especially differently wired kids. And we should be compassionate with ourselves as well, that if we mess up and we don't do what we had intended, we can then see that as a chance to show our children how we take responsibility for making a mistake and how we can be, apologetic and make amends. And they're so forgiving when we actually are sincere about that.
Absolutely. I get a lot of practice with that one, and it's definitely paying off. So first of all, congratulations on the book. It really is fantastic, and it's so well researched, and it's a great resource for all parents, but there's so much practical application for parents raising atypical kids. So can you tell us how listeners can find you? And I know that you're on a book tour right now, so anything you want to share about that as well?
Yes, I appreciate the question. My website is katherinerlewis.com, and that has my book tour schedule, and it has articles that I've written or been interviewed in. I'm also on Facebook at Katherine R. Lewis, or that's my Facebook page, and Twitter is Katherine Lewis. Instagram is Katherine Reynolds Lewis, which I'm just learning, so I welcome any tips on using Instagram, but really always excited to connect with anybody who's read the book or who's interested in these ideas. My contact information is all on the website as well.
Wonderful. And my tip for Instagram is just all selfies all the time. So no. Listeners, I will make sure that all of the links for Katherine's social media and website and her book tour will be on the show notes page. So you can just go there and click through and find that, as well as her book, The Good News About Bad Behavior. Katherine, thank you so much for coming by. I'm so happy to have had this conversation with you, and I look forward to staying connected with all the awesome work you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really glad that we were able to discover one another, and look forward to hopefully meeting in person sometime soon.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. For the show notes for this episode, including links to Katherine's book, The Good News About Bad Behavior, her book tour stops, and all the other resources we discussed, visit tiltparenting.com/111. If you like what we're doing at the Tilt Parenting Podcast and you'd like to support us, there are a few easy and meaningful ways you can do this. One is to join my Patreon campaign. Patreon is an online platform that allows people to make a small monthly contribution to support the work of an artist or a musician, or in my case, a podcaster. It's super easy to sign up, and even a small donation helps. If you'd like to support the show, visit patreon.com/tiltparenting, or you can find a link at the Tilt Parenting website. The other way you can help is to head over to iTunes and leave a rating or review, or both if you haven't done so already. This really helps keep our podcast highly visible, which in turn makes it easier for me when I try to land those big guests. Thank you so much. And thanks again for listening. For more information on Tilt Parenting, visit www.tiltparenting.com.
Hey, are you a parent of a teenager? Are you feeling overwhelmed about how to be what they need while also holding limits and boundaries that keep them safe? Are you tired of conversations that negate how messy this season of parenting is? Well, I've got you. My name is Casey O'Rourke. I am a positive discipline trainer, parent coach, and the host of the Joyful Courage podcast. Every week, I come to you with an interview digging into tough topics with experts I trust, and solo shows that go deep into the personal growth and mindset needed to raise teens in a way that grows them into confident, capable young people. I am not afraid of getting real about the intersection of conscious parenting and the teen years, while also bringing in vulnerability, humor, and lightness. I'm walking the path with you and honored to serve. Listen to Joyful Courage on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you consume podcasts.